Hey guys, welcome back for another virtual class here through the Farmhouse Paint and Sip. My name is April. I'll be instructing you today. Now for today's painting we are doing our Wisconsin Fall wood sign design that we have. Now a few quick things. I'm going to show you how to get this painting set up, but always keep in mind that there is always going to be differences and variance based on what you had set as the background color for your sign. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to get us started for what we're going to need to do to get our area set up for working. Now, the first thing you're going to need is you're going to want your wood sign out. Now, at this point, you're going to need that stencil still on. I'm going to be doing our painting just on a canvas here today. However, you'll be doing it and just filling in with that Wisconsin sign. Now, a quick thing to note, you want to make sure you are always paying attention to the edges of your stencil. So the Wisconsin has the outline of the state, however, you want to make sure that you keep that paint within that stencil design, and if it overlaps a little bit on the edges of the stencil, that's a-okay. The one thing you don't want is to accidentally paint all the way over the stencil and onto the part of your board that you want to keep that solid background color. So just be aware of that while you're working so you don't paint off of the stencil and start going on the actual sign in the area that you want to keep clean and pristine. Now, second thing to keep in mind, now I'm working on a white background today. So depending on what you did for the coloring of your board, most often what we have is a lot of more natural tones for the board, so you use a lot of browns for that base, sort of like what we have in our example picture. Now, if you have a very dark brown background or something close to like a black color, even, because I've seen that a few times, while it has a really nice rich tone, you want to be careful about that with what you're about to paint on top. So if you want your colors to stay very vibrant and to have a lot of rich tones, but you have a dark background, what you want to do first is you're going to want to use your large flat brush. So you should have 3 in your brush kits. A large flat brush, a medium sized, and then a little guy. You're going to want to use that large one. And you're just going to want to fill that whole Wisconsin in with just a base of white paint first, and you're going to want to let that dry. Once that's a little bit more dry so that you can put your color on top without it turning like a pale pastel version of it, you will be good to go. So if you do need to put those bases on first, feel free to do so. Now, you don't have to do that if you have a board sort of similar to the coloring that we have in our example picture here. It's a little bit more of a soft, warmer brown. You may want to have it in those natural tones to show through a little bit. Maybe you don't want the colors to be overly vibrant. If you want it to have a little bit more of a soft, subtle feel, you can skip doing a base of white and let some of that brown tone show through on your board. This gives it a little bit of a rustic feel, but that again is up to you on what you would like. If you do choose to go that route, and maybe afterwards you want to add some more areas of contrast and you want those colors to be a little bit more vibrant, you can always work back on top. So if you work in layers, you can layer it on top to get the vibrancy that you would like. I'll just be showing you how to do the nice base that we have on ours. That way when you do add yours on top, that you get the colors that you want. Now, to start us off, I'm going to be starting with the bottom where we have a little bit of this green grass and that little river or stream that goes through. So that's what I'm going to be starting with, and then we're going to work into adding the sky as well as then the trees on top. Now, first things first, what we have is a background that has a lot of those green for the grass. So I'm going to need a mix of green because we don't have green in our kits. What we need to mix is half blue, half yellow. So I'm going to mix a little pile of blue and yellow. I already have a palette that I've been working with here. So I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow here, and I have some blue. I'm just going to scoop and move it to the side here, but I'm going to need about 50-50, so equal amounts of blue and yellow. When you mix those together, it'll give you a green shade. Now, it's always up to preference. If you want it to be a lighter green or more of a lime green, you can add more yellow to it. If you want it to be more teal, you can add more blue. Now, once you have a base that you like, what I want to start with is I'm just going to use it to kind of map out a little bit where I want my river, and then I'm going to fill in on either side with that green. You can do this in reverse. If you want to do the river first with blue and then add green along the sides, you can do that. All up to you. Now our river is going to be widest towards the bottom, so you want that to take up the most of the space. I'm just going to start with a few dashes, so like here may be where I want the opening for my river, and as it moves farther away, it gets a little skinnier. Now, if I'm using this as my Wisconsin, this would here be closer towards the top of Wisconsin, this is the bottom. I want to go maybe halfway through the canvas with my green, maybe even a little bit less. So I'm just going to do like a little notch over here, so that's where I kind of want the back to be. So I want my river to kind of be a thin little point once it gets there. Now on our picture here, it kind of curves to the right. So I'm going to start with it slightly curving to the right. I'm going to do that on this left side too. Now as I go, I'm trying to make these 2 points match. I want them to kind of match up towards the back end here. Now on either side, I'm going to fill that in with green. Again, I don't have to worry about really on mine because mine's just the canvas, but on yours you want to make sure that, say if this is the end of the stencil, that I'm not dragging it all the way across to the very end of the board, because then you will have green that you're going to need to cover up. So always just be aware of your stencil as you are going. So I filled in, I have a little green there. I'm going to add a little green here. Lovely. Now once you have a green base, we can clean off that brush. Now easiest way you can clean off brushes is if you have a cup of water, you want to just take your brush, push it all the way to the very bottom of your cup, stir that back and forth. It's going to knock out most of the paint that you have trapped in there, and then you can use a piece of paper towel to squeeze out any remaining water. So now I have my green grass on either side, and I have my little stream mapped out here in the middle. What I want to do is I want to make a lighter blue to kind of fill in that stream. Now for a light blue, I'm going to need to mix blue and a little bit of white. So on my plate here I have my pile, so I can pull some blue. I'm going to pull a little bit of white. Now the more white you add, it's going to get a more pale coloring. I recommend just kind of slowly adding it in. Now I'm kind of looking for maybe just a little bit more of a richer blue than a sky blue, so I'm going to add a little more blue back in. But it's all up to you and what colors you like. Now once you have a blue that you like, I'm going to fill in the stream. Now I'm doing this with the medium brush. If you want more control, especially when you get towards this back end, you can switch to the, I'm using the large brush, you can switch to the medium brush when you get farther in the back, just so you can keep those lines a little bit more clean and crisp. It's a little bit more finagling if you're trying to get it with the large brush, although it is doable. Alright, so I have my little stream filled in. Now this next step is optional. I'm showing you because personally I think it gives a little extra depth. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. Now I'm going to clean off my large brush. I'm going to set that to the side. I'm going to switch over to my medium-sized brush. What I'm going to be doing is I want to make it a little bit darker of a blue towards this back section so that it gets lighter as it comes forward. What I'm going to do is I'm just dipping and I'm getting just a very little bit of the regular blue on my brush. I'm going to start just kind of filling in this very back section. And now as I come forward, I'm not reapplying the paint, I'm just letting it kind of blend and drag in there with my regular light blue that I had filling in the rest of that shape. Now you can add more of this or less of this depending on what you like. I'm doing it in the horizontal brush strokes. This way if I do see any brush strokes coming through, it kind of goes and follows sort of like reflections across the water. So I added a little bit of that. Just gives a little extra depth there. It's all up to you on if you want to add that or not. And there you have it. So that's what I have for our little river/stream area. Now we do have a few extra little details here in the grass and the ground texture. So we have it gets a little darker as it's along this little riverbed. But before I do that, what I want to do is I'm just going to put my base color down for the sky, and then I'll be coming back and revisiting, adding in these smaller details, and then adding the tree trunks in. Now for the background sky, you see it mostly at the top here. So you see a lot of it's kind of like a deeper red color. Now I'm going to be mixing just a little bit lighter than that. I'm going to aim for a little bit more of a coral. If you want it just to be that true bright red, you can use just the regular red paint and place that, and you'll be filling all the way up to this bottom line. Otherwise, what I'm going to be mixing is more of a reddish coral color, so it's up to you on what you want to use. I'm going to use my large brush to fill in this area and to mix the color. Now what I'm going to mix is mostly red. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow just to kind of start giving it a slight orangish hue to it, so it's not just a fire engine red. Now it's a very slight amount once it's mostly red and a little bit of orange or a little bit of yellow. It gives you a very fiery orange, so it's still very warm. So if you see that, it doesn't look on camera especially a whole lot different than red. And maybe a touch more so it's a little bit more, so you can slightly see it there, the red and then versus the orange. Now I'm going to add just a tiny bit of white to this just to make it a little bit lighter. Now this isn't a whole lot different than the red background we have and what you can see initially. This one is just a little bit more orangey and a little bit lighter, just so that it's not quite as dark of a sky. Now of course you can make your sky any color that you like, so you don't have to stick with the red, you don't have to stick with this coral, whatever you want to do. So once you have a shade that you like, you're going to be filling in the background with it. And do large brush strokes back and forth. Now, similar to if you would have had to fill in your board with the white paint, if you had a really dark background. I'm holding my brush farther towards the back end. This way I can do long, even brush strokes across. Now you might notice as I'm painting, I kind of keep going over the same spots and I kind of keep thinning and spreading it out. What I'm looking for is any areas that I might see globs of paint or thicker sections. I want to spread it out, I want to thin that out so that it dries a little bit faster. Now the faster it dries, the more quickly you can add on other details and they don't blend and run into each other as much. Now the coloring of the camera definitely picks up a little bit different than what something looks like in person, so please note that when you see these pictures, because on camera this looks just like straight red, like a very fiery red. In person it looks a little bit more of a coral tone. Okay, so I filled all the way up to that background line. So now I have that in place. I'm just going to clean off my brush. Now I'm just going to leave an extra minute or two here so you can fill in the sky portion of your Wisconsin scene. After that, we're going to be moving forward to adding a little bit of the detailing here and start adding in our tree trunks. Bringing back so you can see on a larger scale what your original is looking like. So those trees are going to cover up a large section of the sky, so it's really, again, it's just a background layer that you only see a little bit of towards the top especially. So if you don't get the shade perfect, there is no worry about it. You're going to have plenty of time to add extra detailings with your trees. Now what we're going to move to next, as mentioned, is going to be adding in just a little bit of the detailing, so darkening it up around the river edge, and then we're going to start adding in the trunks for our trees. Now you're going to notice I'm going to be using my little brush. It's going to be especially important to use that around the edges here for the river. However, when I go to the trunk, you can switch over to the medium brush just so you can make those lines just slightly thicker. It would take a long time to try to fill in those lines with just this little brush because it does have a very fine point. Now for the river edge and then for our tree trunks, we don't want to get too carried away with making it too dark, so I don't want to use just the regular black paint. What I want to do is I want to mix a little pile of black and brown so I can make a dark brown color. So I have some brown, I have a little black. I'm going to mix it together. Now you do want it notably different, so not just a little bit of black. You're going to have to add enough to make the color noticeably darker, because on its own brown can tend to go on very lightly, especially when you're painting on top of other colors. But you don't want to add so much black that it just turns black. You do want to have a hint of that warmth from the brown to show through. So it's hard to tell on camera. Here's my pile of black paint, here's the darker brown. It isn't quite as dark in person as it looks on camera, it's just a little bit lighter than that. So keep that in mind. But once you have a color that you like, I'm going to start by just adding a little bit of outlining. So I'm going around my little river bank here. Now once I hit where it's kind of curving, I don't have to add it all the way towards the back. It's sort of like the farther away things are, you lose a lot of detailing and you can't see quite as much, so I don't really need this to carry all the way to the very back there. So it can be a little bit thicker up front. I can see a little bit more here. And as we move away, I can see less of that detail. Now optionally, if you'd like to smooth it out so it's not as flat of a line, you can go back in with a little bit of your green. I can use it on the outer edge of my lines. And sort of how we blended back here with the blue, I can just kind of smooth it out a little bit, straighten it back and forth so it darkens it up a little bit with the grass so that that line isn't quite as solid and opaque. It has a little bit more of a fade into that grass. But it's all more of a stylistic preference on what you would like. Now once I have that set, I can clean off my little brush and set that to the side. I'm going to switch over to my medium-sized flat brush. We're going to get ready to start adding in our tree trunks. Now our trees are going to be using that dark brown color for the trunk, and they kind of line along the river edge here. You don't see quite as much over on this side here, especially depending on the placement of your trees. I'm going to add just like one kind of off to the side here. So I'm going to start on this side because it's a little less work. So I'm going to start with one, leave a little gap so you don't want your trees going all the way off the edge. And see a little bit of a bottom portion. And as it goes up, I'm going to let it get thinner. I don't want it to go all the way off the end of the page. It's up to you how much you want to do and how tall you want your trees to be. I recommend varying the height. One, this lets you see a little bit more of your background if you like that color. And two, it gives a little bit more variety. So you don't want to do too much or too little. So I'm just doing a few. So I'm just starting with these lines. Varying height, the farther away it goes, they're going to get a little bit smaller. So I have a few of those going on this right side. I'm going to add a few on the left. Same deal. It's going to go up. Tallest trees are in the front, and as they move farther away, get a little bit shorter. Now I have a lot of my little trees here lining the sides. Now I don't really have to worry too much about this side, but especially over here, these trees are going to be filled with a bunch of our leaves. Now, because we're placing those colors on top, you might and should see in a few spots where you might see the trunk through that. Because of that, especially on the side where we have the main focus of our trees, I'm going to add a few little branches offshooting. Now what I want to do is I want to start with my brush connecting towards the point here on the tree, and then as I move farther away, I kind of lift up with my brush so it gets a thinner line. Doesn't have to be perfect because again we're going to be covering and filling this in. I recommend kind of varying it so some can be long and curvy, some can be nice and thin, whatever you want to do. This kind of helps give your tree shape. Now I mostly want to focus and add a little bit of this towards these first few trees. Again, the farther away we go, the less detail we have. Maybe want to add like one or two over here. Again, not much. Always remember, we are covering this up with some leaves, but this just gives us a nice base to work with. Once we have those colors in place, what we're going to do is we're going to start adding in our leaves. Now what I recommend, because we have a lot more of those warm tones of like some light orange and some yellow is the main components we have for these trees and their leaves, I recommend starting with the orange first so you can put a base of a lighter orange color, and then once that's in place then you can add a light yellow on top. That way it keeps its vibrancy and it kind of pulls it to the front a little more. Now as I'm getting ready for that, I'm going to clean off the medium brush because I can still use that. But I want to mix first my orange color. Now I have a little pile already here. You can just mix directly in it. I want to start with just a little bit of red, a good amount of yellow. So mostly yellow, a little bit of red is going to get you just like a carrot orange color. I'm going to add a little extra yellow to it so it's nice and light. And lastly, I want to add just a little bit of the white paint to it. Now the main point of the white paint is just to make it a little bit more opaque, because red and yellow on their own are very thin and translucent. So I'll mix that together and it's giving me like a peachy orange color. It's not quite as peachy as it looks on camera, it's a little bit more orange than that. But again, up to you on what colors you'd like. Now to apply and start filling in your trees, there's a few ways about it. I can show you one and then I'll show you the second way. The first being, you can just push with your brush lightly. So I just push down and I lift up right away. So it's just this light dabbing motion. I can do that around the trees, and I want to leave a little bit of an irregular edge. So as I'm adding and dabbing in for these trees, I don't want it to be like a perfect circle, because that gives it a very unnatural feel. I want to make sure that my trees have a little bit more of a natural flow than that. As you see, I'm just kind of dabbing and adding the foliage on all of my trees. It's covering up a lot of the trunks. You can leave a few little spaces where you might see some. So on this side I'm going to show you this technique. In just a second I'm going to show you another way you can apply it. Once I show you that, it'll be all personal preference as to which way you want to add it to your picture. As always, you want to impress on you, there is no right or wrong way to do it. Whatever kind of helps get the job done in this case is whatever technique you want with painting. As well, the wood sign portion of your project is very technical and you want to make sure you're applying your stencil correctly and following the steps to take off the stencils. When it comes to the painting portion of it, we aren't quite as technical. It's much more free-flowing, and it's about what your preferences are and what you would like to see. So this is just one way to add it in. Again, just lightly dabbing with your brush. Now the second way that I can kind of blot in and start adding in some of the trees is by using like a little crumpled up piece of paper towel. So I can set this brush to the side. Now with the piece of paper towel, I'm just going to tear off a little section of it, crumple it up, so it's going to give me kind of like a little more of a rough, jaggedy edge. I want to crumple up so it's not completely smooth. I have some textures from the folds. I want to dip that into my orange. I'm going to use that to kind of blot on some leaves. So it leaves a little bit more of this open texture. I can kind of use that to just kind of fill in my tree shapes. Now, same as before, we're doing a dabbing motion, so you don't want to rub and smear with your paper towel piece. If you do that, you might smear a little bit of the background colors in there. That's fine if you'd like to have that happen, and you'd like to see more of those background colors kind of blending on in. However, if that's not what you want to do, then you're going to not want to push or smear it. Blotting on top leaves that little bit of that textured feel, and you can just layer on top with more color once you put an initial base down, just to build it up more. But blot with it, don't smear with it, and you'll get the best textured effect. So as mentioned, you can see some sections where I can see a lot of my trunk showing through. We are going to be adding another layer with a light yellow on top as well. So you're going to hang tight, but if there is areas that you can see a lot more background and you don't want to see it, you can go in with just a little bit more of your orange, just to blot and fill that in on top. Now, same as before, I want to make sure we are always keeping in mind the edge of the stencil. You don't want to lose track of that while you're working. Turn that so I don't get as much of the glare. So there you have it. I kind of filled in a lot of that tree line with our orange. Now I'm going to use my medium brush for the next step. You can also use the little one if you'd like, but we have a lot of just little dashes of the orange down on the bottom here because we have a lot of fallen leaves. I just want to do short little quick dashes, so that'll give me these smaller little marks that can kind of read as fallen leaves. I'm going to start with doing just a little base with my orange here. I want to make sure I really concentrate that around where the trees are, a little less so against by the farther away it goes from my trees. So this looks like it's falling around them. Now I make sure I also put a lot by the base of the trees. This helps cover if you're not as fond of the line that you have where it kind of stops right away. Okay, so I'm filling in. I have a lot of that orange coming through. Now you may want to get this orange base just a little bit of time to dry. Because directly on top we're going to be putting a light yellow, so a yellow and white mix. I recommend doing like half yellow, half white. It'll keep it nice and pale. If you do want it more of a vibrant yellow, you can add more yellow. It may just take a few extra layers because yellow is very thin. Now you can apply this directly on top of your orange. Same ways too, you can either use the paper towel to blot it on, or you can use your brush, whichever you feel more comfortable with. You can use a combination of the two again. Just the dabbing motion or blotting with my brush. Now that looks almost white on camera, but in person that's much more yellowy. Now you can do a combination of the two, so I just put my yellow down and I can blot back on top with a little bit of orange. So this helps kind of blend and break up those shapes. Blend it together a little bit. Again, this is all up to you on what you like. If you want to keep them a little bit more separated so you can see the individual orange and the individual yellow, you can do that too. So as far, I like to start with just adding a little bit in with the trees. You can blot that in first. Blot some orange back in on top. Now the very last thing that your painting needs is you can use either your medium brush or your little brush. I'm going to use my little brush this time around. And just add a few little dashes of light leaves on the ground. Now that completes our fall painting scene for our Wisconsin Fall wood board. If there's anything that our painting doesn't have that you'd like to see in your wood board design, feel free to add it in. So if you want to add a sun in, clouds in, anything in the water, maybe different colors, whatever you want to add or any extra details you want to provide, feel free to do so. Once you have this base set for your painting, you'll be able to take off your stencil, so if you have the video to follow along with, You can follow along and match with the video. That way you can see the best ways to take off the stencil that helps preserve your painting and lets you keep it in all its beautiful glory. Thank you for painting along with us today. We hope you found this helpful. If you do have any questions, feel free to let us know. Otherwise, stay safe, stay warm, and we hope to see you soon. Take care.